Get me excited from the music. Hey, everybody. This is TJ Van Tol. I am a developer advocate at Blues Wireless, and welcome to React Wednesdays. With me, as always, I've got Dan Wilson. Dan, how you doing? You enjoying the music?
I do enjoy the music. In fact, I was dancing until I figured out the music stops and people would see me. So, I had to put a pause to that. But I'm also working at Blues Wireless in the marketing department, and Blues Wireless t-shirts are on vogue. Like, everyone needs one of these. So
I've got my old NativeScript one. I've got my Blues one around here somewhere in the hat. I've got to get swagged up. I'm representing Detroit here today as well.
As one does.
Mostly because my hair is I need a haircut, but it's all right. We'll go with the Tigers. But we are React Wednesdays. And if you are new here, this is a stream. We do it every Wednesday, as the name sort of implies. We bring on cool, interesting people from around the React, from around the JavaScript worlds, and we invite them on and have them show us something interesting and cool. So in a minute, we're going to welcome Ryan Carniato to talk about Solid.js, but I'll just drop in the website in the chat. Because you can always check the website for upcoming shows. You can do things like add to your calendar. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking Astro with Nate Moore, which is pretty exciting. Astro is an interesting project around static sites. I don't totally understand it, so I'm kind of excited to have him on to explain it to us. So just make sure to check out the site. We're doing lots of cool stuff, new shows all the time. But for this week, I'm going to welcome Ryan Carniato. Ryan, welcome to React Wednesdays. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, do you want to tell people who you are, what you do, that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm here probably because I wrote a JavaScript framework that is based on reactive primitives that looks a lot like React. That's probably the tie-in to React Wednesdays. But it has some similarities, it has some differences, and we'll look at that today because, as you can imagine, a lot of people are like, "Well, another JavaScript framework?"
Yeah, that's actually my first question. I think like anytime we have someone who writes like a JavaScript framework on, I have to ask them, why did the world need yet another JavaScript framework, right? So I'm curious, like, what was the spark, the inspiration behind creating the framework?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize I've been working on Solid.js for a long time. Like, it's been so long, it's hard for me to put an exact date on it. I did find my first commit in a private repo, and it was August 2016.
Oh wow!
So just to understand, this is something I've been doing for a long time. I know recently it's 1.0 and it's been getting more attention or buzz, but I started this I started thinking about this almost immediately when I first saw React getting popular. Honestly, I a different favorite framework before React came out, and a different approach, and I really liked it. And React popularity basically just started killing all the other options, and I was like, they're not wrong. Like, React has some big benefits. So I was like, can I take this paradigm I loved, which if people might be familiar, it's pretty old, Knockout.js. I loved Knockout.js.
Yep.
And I was like, can I modernize Knockout.js? And that's I was working on it for a long time. At first, just kind of, I thought maybe I could use it at work or something. And, it was kind of my hobby project. And then I was like, well, how do I prove that this is worth being in the world? I think the model is better or good. Let's say that I'm not going to say better necessarily, but we'll get there. But like, I like the developer experience. I like the whole way of setting up my apps. And then I was like, is there some, is performance bad? Like, people were showing React, the VDOM is faster than the DOM, all this stuff. So I started working on performance. And at a certain point, I was fine with that, doing my thing. And even with the performance benchmarks, that's why I open sourced it. But then one day, Dan Abramoff came on the stage, end of October in 2018, and he introduced hooks. And I was like, oh, for me, that was a big shocker, because I was never expecting React to go that way. And hooks actually look a lot like I was doing in Solid. And immediately I was like, okay, people might actually be interested in this. And that's when the switch happened. It was actually hooks that got me to promote Solid, because I felt that we already had a pattern there that, had some benefits over hooks.
Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean?
Well, the data model for hooks is something I've long called declarative data. It's this idea that you build all your state interactions off composable primitives, like hooks. Like, you can picture hooks. You can have use state and use effect, but then you might make a higher order hook and wrap it, and you kind of build this behavior, and it kind of gets co-located together. Like, you, instead of having class life cycles, which you split apart, you basically can go, everything around this data belongs together and can be grouped together. That pattern existed in reactive libraries in the early 2010s. That was the thing. And then React came in and they kind of brought back in class life cycles. I mean, Angular was doing this already. I was a .NET programmer in the mid 2000s, and I was very familiar with the class life cycles and like ASP.NET and stuff. And I saw React and I was like, ugh. And I know this is a weird thing, but then when hooks came, they brought back the primitives and that kind of declarative pattern. So I was like, maybe people will check out this framework that I'm working on.
Yeah, I've got more questions about that, but it might make more sense to ask them when we start looking at some code. Yeah,
no, for sure. And I put like a couple slides together just to kind of get my main point across at the beginning here, and then we can dive in. Maybe I'll just start there. I'll share my screen if that makes sense.
Us marketing people love slides.
No, it's just helps me get my thoughts together, because otherwise I kind of get a little. Anyone who knows who like asks me a question, I just keep on talking and I get kind of distracted, right? So,
yep.
The reason we're here, as I said, is because I built what people consider React like framework, right? It's built on simple primitives like hooks, basically, function components, JSX, and values things that React values, like unidirectional flow, rewrite, segregation. These are all kind of topics, philosophy points that you're all very familiar being React developers. But on the flip side, it's nothing like React, and that is that it's built on fine-grained reactivity. Like, it looks like React, but that's me almost spoofing the API, or depending on how you look at it, kind of us meeting in the middle, right? And there's some impact of that, which I'm going to show in a minute. But components render once; they don't render over and over again, and there's no virtual DOM. And I'm going to kind of hop back out of here for a second. But the best way that I can explain this or think about this is, I told you I started Solid a long time ago, so much before React hooks came out. And I think it's almost better to kind of reset your thinking or rewind back to that first time you saw React hooks. I think that'll almost be the most kind of beneficial look here, because what is happening code sandbox?
It's while that's loading, it is interesting because even just seeing no virtual DOM, like it's funny how that's gained such like it's gained like almost a mythical status. Like people don't question that. Like the virtual DOM is just the way. Like it's you don't really question the technical underpinnings of it so much, more that it's just got this reputation of being fast and the way to build modern web applications.
Did Code Sandbox like just go down on me? This is so funny. It's
funny.
I've got
a solid JS site, and it's throwing an issue on the Code Sandbox there as well. You might have just gotten DDoS'd by React.
Code Sandbox, the homepage is working for me. I'll try to go in and create something and see.
Yeah, the reason I want Code Sandbox is, and this is, I have all these solid examples. Okay, there we go. Yeah, the reason I wanted to go to this Code Sandbox here was because, and it's probably because I did DDoS myself at a certain point here, is I wanted to show you, React first, because let's go back to hooks. And I had to comment this out because I just want to show you this simple example. Can you guys see my screen? I don't know if
absolutely. Yep.
Yep. Looks good.
Everyone's seen this example probably. I'm going to uncomment this because it's dangerous. That's part of the problem. Probably what killed this here is when I first saw set use state, I was like, okay, let's make a counter and update it every second. And everyone knows this is terribly bad React code, and you can probably guess why. But I'll do this anyways. And look, oh, our counter is working. Sort of. The problem is every time our component here re-renders, it's creating a new interval. And basically when Code Sandbox starts doing something that's reloading, you can instantly see the thing gets out of sync and goes crazy. And I'm pretty sure this is what killed my browser window.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have some JavaScript running out of control.
And stocks that do that same thing with numbers are what killed my portfolio.
So I'm gonna do what every good React developer knows that they have to do with this interval is and stick it in use effect. Okay, let's okay. We're better, sort of. Actually, this is exactly the same problem again, and you know why? Because we're not cleaning up after ourselves. Okay, so let's yeah, I'm going to do that so I can stop executing. Let's do this. I mean, we've seen this example before, and the reason I'm bringing up this example again, I mean, Dan Abramoff covers it really well in his article about use interval, but I just want to kind of go through the steps here because as you can see, started with set interval, no good. We need to add cleanup, so we wrap it in effect. This looks like it works, but it actually is the same problem. Or it's not as bad. It's not going out of control now, but we're still creating a new interval and clearing it every time. If you had some other state that was updating as well, you'd mess it up because every time the component re-renders, it would re-render this, and that would like interrupt and change the timing of this interval. So we know that the solution, of course, is to put dependency array so that we only mount this at the beginning. But as we all know, there's a problem. We never get past 1. And that's because of the stale closure around count. Even though the outside world updates, this effect never updates. Basically, in React, we have to whitelist the changes for our hooks or primitives. And obviously, in the simple example, you could just, go, oh, well, let's make this functional component form, and we're back in business, right? But the point here is that you can't always do that. What if you're reading some fresh props or something? You have to always, and what if there's multiple hooks in your component? You also always have to be kind of aware that the outside world updates different than the inside world, and you have to act according to it. And one of the things that where is it? Let me go to my sandboxes. I want to kind of show here is that Dan went ahead and solved this problem for us. Here is our perfect version of our React counter example. And I'm not sure if I should get too much detail on how this works, but you can see the key to this is keeping references to the saved callback and then using an effect to set the current ref, and then basically using the saved callback, and that way we get around the stale closure issue, and then the rest of our code kind of works the same. But this is a bit of a jump from at least where I started. I don't know about you.
No, like I think like it's funny when you brought up when I first thought of hooks, and my first reaction with hooks was like at first it was, oh cool, like interesting for state, and then like the second reaction was, oh, because then you get into some of these weird effect state relationships, and like the some of this is really like esoteric stuff. Like you even in the like quote unquote basic version, you even said of course a few times, and those of courses would be pretty big leaps for people coming into React, right? Because like you learn that stuff the hard way. Sometimes you learn that stuff in production with like so some of these things with like effects that do things that you might not expect them to do all of the time.
Exactly. And that's why I wanted to reset our thinking there, because I feel like you know all these rules now, and maybe they're second nature, but we really have to get in them. For me, because I started before hooks, get in the mindset of it. And I'm not the only person who was in this mindset, to be fair. Like Rich Harris, Evan Yu, these people who were already using reactive libraries looked at hooks and were like, okay. And then they're like, huh. And and I think a lot of this is the key to it. Basically, for me, you know that you've hit that point that things are going to get kind of hairy is when you have to use ref for something that is not a DOM ref. Like once you get to that point, you've crossed that threshold.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? I think it was Tupac that said all problems can be solved with hooks except the problem of too many hooks. But I could get that quote off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And actually, and the similar thing with components too. When you talk about it, I might get to that in a bit later. But you can always build another abstraction layer to kind of solve it, which is a beautiful thing about programming. But the reason I wanted to start here is it just. This is what we're used to. Hooks are incredibly powerful. They give us this ability to compose, and I think composition is king. This is the reason, like that React is so successful. Components composition was so big when it came out, and hooks composition is a big deal too. I see some frameworks kind of skirting on this, and I think they're missing this huge benefit. So everything that I've been building with Solid is with this kind of composition in mind. So now that we've seen React, we're familiar with this example. I'm going to go back and go, okay, what does this look like in Solid? And let's restart our counter. It's a little different, but can you guys see my text? Is it big enough?
Yeah,
that looks good.
Kind of reading it now.
But there are some subtle differences here. But the first thing you're going to notice probably, the very first thing, other than the name isn't used state here, is that there is no create effect, right? Or use effect. In Solid, I use create instead of use. This is a subtle naming difference, but it's to signify that it doesn't run over and over and over again. You create it and you create it once. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But this code, if I comment out this cleanup function, I'm not doing a good job for the world, but this is the top level app. Presumably, this never gets unmounted. This is perfect. This is perfectly fine in that sense. When the page unloads, it'll unload. We're basically back at that first place we started with React. We just made a count, set interval, and did it. And that's Solid in a nutshell. Like you just skip the whole rest of it. Like you start from that point and took a fork right at the beginning. Your first idea of how this should work just worked. I'm going to explain how this works, but I mean, obviously I needed a cleanup, so I added a cleanup. But this is the example. And where this kind of starts is the fact that in Solid, our state are reactive primitives. Have either used MobX before?
Vaguely. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but it's probably worth explaining for people watching that haven't used it before.
Yeah, basically, the whole trick to MobX or view reactivity is that you have both the idea of a getter and a setter. With React State, what you return is just the value, and you have a setter function. With reactive libraries, we don't just interrupt we don't both intercept the set, but we have to intercept the get. And the reason we intercept the get is so that we can create reactive subscriptions. And the reason we do this is because we subscribe to all the updates separately. This is why we don't need components to run again, essentially, because every little piece updates separately. And to kind of emphasize this, see this count here? This count is being called as a function, as it is as well here, because that's how we read the value. And
okay.
Right? Because it's a getter and a setter. And once you do that, only there's no vdom diff component re-render like let's go console.log hello. Oh, okay. I'm gonna you see the one console log, there's hello here, but let's clear the console and refresh. Okay, hello. Now it's updating and console.log is not being called. And that's because this is why I love these REPLs, by the way. It's because essentially, I mean, I sort of optimized this out because I don't need to call it, but let's make this an expression. I'm wrapping this expression, this h1 expression in a function, count plus 1. I'm passing it a function. When it updates, and I'm going to explain how this works a little bit better in a minute, only this function calls updates. To make it a little bit, this insert's kind of burying the lead a bit because it's like it needs to, you can insert a JSX, you can insert anything here. So I need a special helper. But if I change this insert to say, let's be text content, which is just setting some text on a DOM element, what you can see is our whole process here is cloning a DOM tree, walking to its first child. So this is what we're cloning. We have a template. It's h1, and we actually inserted a space in this template here because we have text. And we clone it, we walk to it, and then this is Solid's internal, but you can picture this like use effect or create effect or whatever. It just wrapped an effect around setting the data property on that text element. I mean, this is getting kind of low into like the DOM APIs, but what you can literally picture is we subscribe to an event on this one text node that just pinpoint the text on that text node. So when your state updates, it's not rerunning a component, it's not diffing, it's literally just going update that text, pinpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at. I actually like this environment that you expose quite a bit because I feel like you're apologizing because there's some complexity here. But once again, I think the React equivalent would scare people.
Yes, I didn't change your code. Like until you got to the JSX, this is your code. Set count, interval, console log. Like everything up until the JSX is exactly your code runtime, and that's the same in React. To be fair, it's not the same in some libraries like Svelte or whatnot. But once you got to the JSX, I just go, oh, this is a DOM element, and I optimize for it. But ultimately, it's just more of the same. See, Solid renderer is its own reactive system. Solid's a state management library that renders. Like basically, it has an idea of an effect like React, but it's a reactive subscription. And basically, the whole render tree is just built on it. Like it's kind of out in the open. I know insert was a helper that kind of hit it, but this is like how much did I import from the library here? Template. This just changes this into an HTML template element, so it doesn't do much. Render, which does a little bit of setup, but I mean, let's not worry about that too much. Create component and effect. Effect, I already told you, is basically the same as Solid's create effect. It's just like something you would use in your code. And create component, this is the whole thing. I have to do a little bit of stuff with the reactivity. I have to make the scope not track. That you don't need to really know the details, but for the end user, basically pretend it doesn't exist. It just calls your function once. Render, call app. Like basically create component is almost an identity function. Essentially calls the function with the props. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second. But more or less, you can just, all the code that's happening on your page is mostly just happening in front of you. If you understand the basics of reactivity, which can, take a little bit more of a learning curve. But if you understand, like, as I said, a library like MobX or whatnot, you literally have everything in front of you.
Is there anything you lose by having the create once methodology? Because I'm curious, because clearly React's doing what it's doing for a reason. So I'm curious if there's some limitations that people have to be aware of.
Yeah, and there's two of them, right? One of them, I have to be kind of conscious of what I'm doing, because I've already kind of hinted at this yet, but let's do it for fun. I like demoing this. I mean, I'm kind of giving away a big obvious here, but can you guess what L is here? Like, you guys?
It's probably nothing, because or will it be like an error, or?
Let me see if I can refresh this.
Because obviously I know what it would be in React. It would be a it would interpret that JSX on the fly, and it would be a reference to that sort of component. I have absolutely no idea if my guess is like some sort of an error or some sort of a problem, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm on the results page. Oh, sorry, I got a breakpoint in here. Weird. Yeah, so sorry, it showed up for a second. It is an actual DOM element. Okay, so
how?
Yeah. Well, you saw me do it. It's not too obvious on the surface here. I cloned it, right? We cloned the element and we returned it, more or less. This is a iffy. It's just so that it keeps the scope in the same thing. But we more or less cloned a DOM element, augmented it, and returned it. So this is what I mean, that there's nothing hidden. This is literally the DOM elements getting written to here. So in terms of a trade-off, it means that we have to be conscious when we make stuff. And this is what I was getting at here. It's not that it's not just that we don't re-render, it's performant. It's like we don't want to re-render because it's incredibly unperformant. It means that for things like a map operation or something, we need to we have helper functions or helper components here, similar to Vue or Svelte, because while you can just map out the DOM elements every time, it's wasteful, right? You want to be able to memoize, essentially, like when it reruns, only create the new things. I could, if you want, I could show that, but what I was thinking actually is to talk about the other trade-off here, because even if that's unfamiliar, it's not hard to get. Do you know what I mean? Like you just like Svelte has an each thing, or Vue has it, and you can just use the helper. And to be fair, Solid supports any kind of JavaScript syntax type interpolation. Like if I let's change this. If I was like vector h1 and I was like, you know what? If the count is bigger than 5, I want to show, this is high. Otherwise, I'm just going to show low, or maybe I'll show the count to make it a little bit more obvious. This sort of thing is perfectly fine. Do you know what I mean? And you can put JSX in here. You can do all your normal patterns. And Solid's compiler is smart enough that it can actually this is a little bit more complicated, but it can hoist out certain expressions and memorize the condition that changes and optimize. It's all for you behind the scenes. So if it's in JavaScript, this is easy. But the problem is a map function is not JavaScript syntax. It's not like a for loop, which is JavaScript syntax. So for that, we need a special map function, and that's why we have a special component. But I don't feel this is too big of a problem, in the sense that we're seeing more and more specialized components coming out of core libraries when you consider things like error boundaries and suspense, which are basically control flows that are components. And when you consider that when you write your real components, like you're building an app, you have pagination, and you wrap it. Like you hit this composition level almost immediately, like layout components. What do you do in React? You build behavior and you compose it and you build it. And so having that as part of the building blocks is actually fairly natural.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think I don't mind using like special components. My only problem is like this gets to the React sort of example with set interval. Will I know if I screwed it up? Like, because that would be my concern, is like I would just do whatever the naive thing is, right? And if it doesn't crash, well, I might send it to production. So I'm curious if I would know I did a bad.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you wouldn't notice in the map function case, because like if we changed this to be an array of 1, 2, 3, whatever, and I'm just going to clean this up. I mean, let's keep it as count, and let's just do what we would always do here with React, which I mean, I guess h1 isn't suitable anymore. Whatever, what is it, ul. And
yeah,
do our thing. Here's the thing. For initial render and nested updates, you're never going to really pay the price. Or for initial render, at least, you're never going to pay the price that much. Let's say item. And then let's make it li, yeah, item. Like, what am I missing? I always miss something. This is not happy, and the reason this is not happy is that I'm missing the close in the map. See, I never use maps, so I never. The thing is, like, how should I put it? Like, this has no performance optimization issue. It's only when you start, adding stuff or whatnot. So, truth of the matter is, yes, you're not going to notice it because this is perfectly valid. Valid in solid.
Well, in a sense, though, that's not too different from React, because like in React, it's not gonna, if you're in an advanced DOM situation where you need to start like memoizing things and craziness, it's not like React's compiler is going to yell at you. You're going to have to notice it yourself, either like your app is running slow or you've brought up DevTools or something like that. Something flagged it for you, made you go down that path.
Exactly. So I want to highlight the other trade-off here, which is I got a new example for you. And at this point, you guys probably are going to follow what's going on here, because I made 3 nested components, and this is our prop drilling example, right? We start at component A, we create our source signal.
This feels like a test.
Yeah, no kidding. At component B, and you pass it, and then finally it gets to C. And here's the thing. I mean, ABC, no big surprise. We know already that if we click this, it's not going to rerun any components. I just showed you that. But how do I do this? This is even across component boundaries. This is the first piece you might be like, okay, yeah, it's like Svelte or Vue or whatever, but this is where the granularity really starts showing up, because essentially it comes down to I told you create component doesn't do anything. It doesn't. It's because the compiler does. It detects which values call functions or member expressions, like basically things that could be dynamic, and it wraps them in a JavaScript getter. Right? This is the prop object, right? This is your code, right? We console log A, create our signal, but then we can create component B. We generate the props object, and the props object, click is just a function handler. It's not dynamic, so it just passes the handler straight through. But this value can change, and because this value can change, we wrap it in a getter. And the reason we do that, I could just pass the signal straight in. I could get rid of the function call and just pass it straight through. But by wrapping in the getter, we can abstract it for the child, because now the child can just get to it on props.value. We don't care if the person passed in a function or a straight value, like just went value equals 1. Like this makes it that you can always access the value at the same place. It's value because that's the name of the prop, not because it's like Vue, which has dot value or anything. I could have named the prop anything. I could name it like something, and then props out something. But the point is, you can see here, here's props, something good through. We just keep on propagating this getter. And the reason what's cool about this is if you realize this doesn't get accessed until it's in this getter, and which accesses what's in this getter. It's kind of like we got like a bit of a, wrapping inception comes in, and it finally gets down here. So what we actually did was take some state that's in the parent, and through these getter wrappers, essentially execute nothing until the component that used it. So what ends up happening is you click that button, and okay, before we click the button, so sorry, let's go to the start. We basically get down to this props.value when we insert it. At the beginning, it's 0, but it's only when it reads this that it reads this, that it reads this. And what this means is it sets up a subscription to this value in the parent only when it gets inserted, essentially. And then when we update the value, parent doesn't re-render, middle child doesn't re-render. This thing just goes, oh, I was the one that tracking, I re-render. So we have this whole tree, and we're only literally updating this text in the button again.
No, this is super fascinating stuff. It's blowing my mind a little bit looking at this to see the relationships. It really does feel like this is like an advanced computer science course, and you're given the code on the left, and they said, okay, now write the compiler that makes this work in a reactive way. Yeah. Because I would definitely not. It would have taken me a long time to come up with that approach, but it is fascinating. Years, maybe? Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Just remember, to make it fun, you've got to fit it all in 6 kilobytes. Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, this was a long effort, and I understand there's a lot of technical details here. But what it highlights, though, is because of the getter access, it's vitally important. Not only do we have to consider our DOM elements, we have to consider how we access our props. As long as you access the props inside the JSX or inside like another hook, everything updates as expected. But if people access it outside, it's not tracking. It's not in the right context, which means that in Solid, there is one golden rule that gets people every time. You cannot destructure. You cannot do this.
Is that because it creates a new object versus serves as a reference back up the tree?
You call the getter. You're calling this function right here instead of calling it down here. You're accessing the value. Vue and MobX actually have this problem, and they have a big blob thing on their documentation like, don't do this, don't destructure in your setup function. But React developers kind of with this mentality of it'll just re-render, and even Vue to a certain sense, you can get past this. Here, this is the gotcha. If you were looking for the gotcha, this is the gotcha. React developers do this all the time, and the thing is even though Solid's super what did I break something again? It's always fun when I do, but it's not just as I was getting at, not just that, I was trying to show the granularity here, and it's kind of crazy that you can even modify the values inside these bindings and have it not re-render the components. But you can do basically anything inside the JSX or the hooks, but you just can't do it outside. Sure, this is fine, or it should be fine. Why? What am I missing here? This is always fun when you do the demo and it's not quite doing what I want it to do. But essentially, you can spread. You can. Oh, do you know why? Because I renamed this. Right, I was spreading something instead of spreading value. Anyway, my point is you can spread. You can do all of the types of stuff you do with React. Just don't destructure the function props.
Yeah, it has to happen in your like JSX, your render for the triggers to work as they should, more or less.
Or hooks, or your hooks are
Okay.
custom. It's because it's the hooks that run over and over again, not the component.
Okay.
So, you know, and I mean, this mentality kind of breeds everywhere you go. You know, like state management. You know, XState. You know, I don't know if you guys are familiar with XState or Redux. It's all the same thing. You know, we can basically take that mentality, and because Solid also, I've been showing you guys signals so far, but because Solid also has a proxy, which is we call stores in Solid, we can basically apply those granular updates even to immutable data objects. Essentially, what we do is we diff the data and then do it granularly, right? So, you know, here's an example where I count how many times I toggle something on and off, right? But we you know, you're used to having selectors and these giant stores, right? And what we can literally do here is like, you know what I love about JSX? It's all just expressions. If you I don't know if you guys know this, if you just console log like something in here, like on and
It'll just evaluate it.
Yeah, and then return the thing after the comma, right? You can comma chain expressions. I learned this by studying cursor code. I mean, your linter or TypeScript will complain, so you should wrap it in parentheses to indicate that it's an expression. But my point is, like, here we have, you know, a big state. No, it's not big. It just has count and disabled count. If this is Redux, you picture this being like your state, and then every time you switch states, you basically use a function to kind of do like a immutable clone kind of thing. Maybe Redux store would have been a better example, but essentially with Solid, because we apply it through our granular proxies, even though you have like, doesn't matter how big your state gets, it only cares about what it's listening to. So like if I click this on, only on fires, only off fires, only on fires, only off fires, even though it's all the same state object. Like I'm probably not doing the best job of explaining this, but essentially that granularity that you've seen even applies to how we manage states. So like you can have giant stores of data and only actually rerun those specific bindings. And as again, you can see it in the compiled output. These are just separate insert statements. They're like their own effects.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that it's built in. Yeah, we've had David from XState on the show actually to explain it to us. So it's interesting to see it like built directly into the framework. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, I am using XState here, right?
And okay.
I just made a hook. I made a hook that wrapped XState's transitions. But I was trying to say,
okay.
You could take Redux or you could take XState and integrate them into solid stores. And then instead of having that problem where you need to use selectors to pull out the specific state, it's granular automatically.
Okay.
So like basically these kind of big immutable patterns, it's very common, you know, with Redux. When you update Redux, the whole store updates and you're like, okay, what has changed? That kind of pieces are built into Solid because the whole idea is that we can continue to pinpoint update even as you scale your data. Like this is the kind of thinking that went into the framework. The idea is that you can use just our own reactive primitives, but you can also interface with third-party libraries that you're used to with React. You just can't. Anything that's specifically made for React doesn't work with Solid. As you can tell, the execution model is very different. So there's no React compat here, even if it looks similar.
Yeah, it's actually one question I was going to ask, because I feel like that's honestly one of the biggest barriers with any framework, like at least achieving success, is the ecosystem around it. Just because I honestly think like one of the biggest things going for React is because it was so popular, like literally everything was built for it, right? You can search React date picker and find 27 of them sort of deal. So I'm curious how you've been approaching that and how that's been going.
It's the hardest thing. It's funny because I talked to Dom from Inferno, and I imagine with Preact it was a similar consideration. When you have a React compat framework, your ability to get adoption is so easy. People just go, oh, alias it. I wasn't trying to be a React clone, and it's funny when people come in, oh, it's another React clone. It just happened that I saw those old reactive frameworks, loved what they did, but then was like, there's problems with this, like. There's a reason React has unidirectional flow. There's a reason that we want kind of immutable interfaces. And so I basically adopted those things. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. And it just so happened that React created hooks, and then we were like, oh, almost on top of each other. And if it wasn't for the DX story, maybe maybe my work was done. But this wasn't calculated from adoption. I just was trying to build what I thought was the approach that worked for me. That was what I felt was best. And it's a struggle. Now that we're 1.0, the ecosystem has a chance to grow. We're seeing a lot of libraries and ports, state management libraries like XState or Zastan getting kind of integrations. Form libraries coming out, component libraries, but this is all going to take time and work. It's similar to something like Svelte. Like we do kind of have to start over. The only place we don't have to start over is tooling, because I'm using JSX. It's funny, I didn't realize how good of a benefit this was going to be. Don't have to worry about language servers. Don't have to worry about syntax highlighting. Don't really have to worry about TypeScript. I get all the the tooly stuff that template DSLs have to do for pretty much free. So this freed me up to actually work on the features, right? I have one more demo. Maybe I'm going kind of over the deep end on complexity, but I just wanted to answer the question of, is there anything else that Solid can't do?
Yeah.
And I would say probably not. Like I could show a quick demo of spinning 3D cubes, but I don't think that's really where we're going to go. I did do that demo. That's what got me to join Twitter, by the way. A year ago when the spinning cubes demo came on, someone's like, "You have to show Solid is the fastest. Get on there and make some cubes."
Keep it up, man.
And I did that, but I have a better example for you guys today.
Oh, good.
I'm excited now. If it's better than spinning cubes,
I mean, it's not as nice looking. But
we'll be the judge of that.
but I want to show you something. You guys seen this one before too?
I have in the past, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sorry, this isn't spinning cubes. I mean, if we really want to see the spinning cubes, I could pull that out for 2 seconds at the end. But when I want, the thing is, people go, oh well, you need a VDOM to do certain things, and the answer to that is not necessarily. Now, everyone's seen this demo, and honestly, this demo is not terribly complicated to do really simply. I mean, in this case, there's no slowdown. We can see that a computer can render this and update it pretty easily without any effort. The reason React was making this big deal about this demo is, what if in every single one of those circles you instead added sorry, I'm gonna have to copy this over. Added a slowdown, right? Basically, we're faking this and we're putting performance in, and the thing is, sure, what you end up with is something way less smooth, right? And the thing is, most people who remade this demo didn't understand that. They didn't understand what React was trying to show. They did what I just did. They didn't put a slowdown in. React was trying to show that when people make their own components in user land, there's a real cost, right? And the thing is, there's a lot of ways to address this problem. One of the cool things about granular reactivity is you can just schedule it, because everything's so pinpoint, like I showed you, and the whole components don't re-render. If you just say set a timeout on this, or use a request animation frame, you can basically solve the problem really easily, sort of. And that's, I just want to kind of show you here, because this is the main reason why React is working on suspense and concurrent rendering, whereas Vue and Preact in them aren't to a certain degree, because they're like, well, React's reconciler is so expensive, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the thing is, yeah, you can just schedule it and fix the problem. However, and you're not seeing this here because it's, the computer's too fast. This can cause what I call is tearing, because each individual update, each of these circles is treated separately. So in theory, it's possible that at any time half the circles are 1 and half the circles are 2, because we've just told those parts to render independently. And the second thing here is we identified already that this is the expensive thing. We scheduled it.
Yeah.
What if you don't know what the expensive thing is? What if people have been building a whole tree of components and you actually don't know where the slowdown is? What if you have a giant app and you don't want tearing? You don't want like half the screen to be 1s and half the screens to be 2. And that is why React has been working so hard on concurrent rendering and whatnot, because they want to be able to render stuff off screen, do all the expensive stuff as it's available, but not have that affect the end user experience. We already see this isn't about like how many cubes you can spin. It's about, being able to offload some work that the end user does in their code that's really expensive, without it impacting it. Like as we saw, the triangles themselves are easy to animate. It's our end user code that's the problem. So I mean,
it's funny you mention that. That's why I always find the argument over what library is faster and what footprint is smaller to be just almost like a sports fan throwing shade at other sports fans, because by the time you add in user code, you're not going to notice. You're really not. And like people will freak out over this optimization or that optimization, and they'll leave wholesale slow code in there and they don't know it. Then they go blame the framework.
And then blame the framework. Exactly. I mean, people are surprised I took the stance because, like, as you guys, I haven't really highlighted in this session, Solid kind of is the fastest in all those benchmarks. Like, it's already like that's the thing, right? You can look it up, JS Framework Benchmark, Isomorphic Benchmark, a lot of the demos out there. It's pretty up there in local bench. Like there's at least half a dozen benchmarks. I built Solid to be the fastest in all those benchmarks, but there's more to life than benchmarks. So like, I mean, and this is why people are like, well, Svelte's fast enough. I'm like, it probably is, but here's the thing. This now instead, I have this start transition thing. You might have seen people talking about it. We can also just keep our code the way it was originally, well, with the slowdown. So we just have our executing memo. You have to understand this isn't a memo, because in Solid, you don't need the memo. You can just hoist a function. But essentially, if you know something could be expensive, this is just the pattern. Use a hook to kind of, wrap it. But we don't know that's the thing causing the slowdown. So instead, start transition. And now everything downstream from this seconds change can be deferred, rendered off screen, and then when it's ready, present. As we know, presenting it isn't that expensive. And in the end, even though you never saw the tearing in the other example, what we have here is concurrent rendering with fine-grained updates in a non-VDOM. As I said, I didn't show you how this works, to be fair. This came out this week on Monday, and I just wanted to use this chance to plug that we have concurrent transitions in Solid, a non-VDOM library.
So what you've done here is help people avoid creating slow code, or preventing their slow code from janking up the application.
Exactly. And this, it's opt-in in Solid, right? You still kind of got to go, this change we don't care about as much. Lower, like you mark it as a transition, right? Essentially you go, everything that's related to the seconds changing is a transition. We wanted to prioritize, I guess, the triangle moving and our hover state over the transition, essentially, of the numbers. So as long as you can identify the change at the top level that is less important. Maybe it's a page navigation. Maybe you want to start rendering stuff in the background when you navigate to the next page. You just go, start transition, and then if that's taking too long, we will interrupt it, and then let the main thread do its work, and then continue.
Fool Snable in chats shared a link to a 3D version of this triangle. Which, so if you're into, if 3D things are your thing, right? Like, so if you could make the whole thing spin, right, and make the demo even cooler.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm not very good at 3D. I was lucky that Rich Harris made a svelte version of the cubes demo, because otherwise I would have never been able to do this myself.
Dude, I saw that and I was like, wow, this guy can really write some code. Like, if he told me to do that, I would get distracted for a week and be like, yeah, I forgot what you said.
Right, and the thing is, this is a completely different problem, because the problem in our triangle demo was that we could render it, but we the end user was doing some expensive computations. This problem is, like, as you scale the triangles, your computer will start to lag, or there's too many cubes on the screen. And concurrent rendering doesn't help with that. Concurrent rendering, that first thing I showed you with scheduling, that works because you're kind of tearing it. It's almost like interlacing. The old televisions, you'd like draw half the lines, then draw the next half the lines. That kind of approach will definitely improve the performance of this. But the reason I show this little demo here is I just wanted to show that, like, you saw how Solid's components don't have DOM, don't have anything. They're just empty functions. For that reason, we can just make a component for scene, perspective, directional. Like, these are just GL primitives, mesh or whatnot. And this repeat is what I was using as an example of a control flow, where we're basically, like, this is a repeater helper essentially as a component. And that's the thing. I mentioned that Solid ships with some control flows. In this case, I just wrote my own. I was like, oh, for this situation, like, it's a little bit complicated how this code works, perhaps. Maybe you need a little bit advanced to write your own control flow. But the thing is, it's not compiled. Like, Solid's control flow is like React. It's just runtime. So if you don't like my for loop component, just write your own component. I was like, okay, I need one that repeats numbers. I don't actually ship that, or just repeats based on a count. I don't actually ship that with a library, so I wrote it. But I have normal for loops, not the one optimized for like just repeating something. And the thing is, like, something like Solid 3.js, the scene component, it's just writing some effects, and then it's not returning anything. It's just looking at its children, it's inspecting its children, and kind of building it up. Basically, if you just use the reactive primitives to wrap some stuff, you can basically use Solid to do anything. It's just a reactive system. You could do mobile, you could do WebGL or whatever. As long as you're not using native tags, you don't actually have to bring in any DOM APIs. Like, the tree shaking is pretty good. So essentially, we're doing like a bunch of kind of code here around making 3D GL things and using effects to use them. One thing I mentioned, there's no hook rules. You notice how this create effect is nested in this other create effect?
Yeah, that's hurting my, like, as a React person and not seeing the dependencies afterwards. Like, it's making me, like, shudder a little bit, right? Like,
yeah. The thing is, the reason is, if there's like a helper that you can get explicit dependencies if you need them. But the thing is, without the array, we can actually do dynamic dependencies. Our dependencies can change each run. So, like, I didn't do this example today, and we probably don't have time. But if you had like a thing that toggled between showing only the first name and showing the full name, when you're only showing the first name and the last name changes, we don't need to do any work, because our dependencies change on each iteration. So we're only tracking what's currently being tracked. And this is super powerful. So on one side, it's like people like, it's less typing, which, a lot of the easy frameworks like pointing out, it's actually can be more granular and more performant, not having the explicit dependencies. Anyways, my whole point for this last little demo here was just that, I'm just kind of building up a 3D mesh just using functions, and then they show up as components, and then ta-da, we have our thing. And as I said, it's pretty performant here. I mean,
I can't even tell they're cubes at that point. It just...
Yeah, I mean, that's while scaling it, right?
Anyways. Yeah, that's wild, man.
I mean, I said I joined Twitter to show as the fastest. It is the fastest.
Congratulations. I mean, I can see you put a lot of thought and work and optimization and thinking and rewriting into this. I mean, congratulations. You've really put together an interesting framework that solves some problems.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop my screen share now, unless there's any more demos or anything. And actually, I wasn't paying attention to the chat. I didn't even see if there's any questions so far.
Got a couple people saying hi, Lazy DK, T-Card, a couple people hanging out. Actually, this is a good chance. If you have any questions for Ryan, now's a good chance to get those in. I think my last two questions for you while we're seeing if any chat ones come in is, I'm curious where Solid got its name from. I always ask that of people. And then you should also give me a good link dump of like, where should people get started? Where should they check out? All those sorts of things.
Okay. Yes, I was in a band and it was a punk rock band. And we had no idea what our name our band was. And we were sitting there and it was around Easter. And I don't know if we have these in the US, but in Canada, we have an Easter. There's boxes of Easter bunnies they're like Mr. something, Mr. this, Mr. that. Anyways, there's a Mr. Solid Easter bunny sitting there, and we were like, it's literally doing the game of like purple chair, brown table, trying to figure out a stupid band name. Naming is so hard, and we went with Mr. Solid. It was a pop punk band. It was cheeky. It had all the things. So for years and years, I went by the moniker of Ryan Solid, just because of my punk rock name. We were a three-piece, kind of like Green Day kind of thing. And
oh man, that's legit.
He's bought in.
Little old English, punk rock Solid on my arm. I basically was stuck with the name again, and then at a certain point I was like Solid JS. Like this, I've always been Ryan Solid, so it's just kind of. I know I wasn't trying to like name it after myself. I just really couldn't think of anything.
Oh, it's so hard, man.
Well,
names are the worst.
That though, I will say, because I always ask everybody where their name came from. You've got the best answer so far. That was way more elaborate than I was expecting.
And I've seen no other tattoos of frameworks. So you get extra 10 points from that. I mean, we were sitting in a chat before this, and someone was like, I don't know how the word salad JS came up. So we Googled it, and it is, in fact, a framework. Like we just randomly came up with a word. So, the fact that you could come up with a name that wasn't taken on NPM, congratulations.
Yeah, I mean,
for that.
And it's not like completely pure. Solid JS was okay, but like Solid's taken, and there's a little bit of dancing, but we got the GitHub org. The NPM org is like a ghost. There's nothing published, but nothing there, and you can't use it. So, we can still do top level library stuff for that. But yeah, it seems to have worked so far.
And Fulesnable thinks it's using the solid principles, which I will now Google.
Yeah, I mean, I to a certain degree, Solid usually gets talk a lot about like object-oriented programming kind of paradigms. I don't know how much I follow that. Like, obviously, stuff like the like single responsibility principle and stuff is really important, and version control and certain things in there. But I'm not quite sure I can put a stamp on that in terms of like completely following it.
I'm not seeing any additional chat questions coming in, so maybe you could give us like, where should people get started? Oh, actually, here one did come up. Is the compiler written in JavaScript?
Yes. This is one of those things. I mentioned how I was able to go fast is by using all existing tooling, and in the future we can look at like changing that up. But like, I didn't invent JSX, so Babel has a great JSX parser. So I just wrote everything. It's just a Babel plugin. Solid's compiler is just a Babel plugin. And I know people are trying to get away from Babel and looking at SWC and all that stuff, and I'm looking into that too. But it was so easy for me to do that part. Like the parts that hang people up when they're writing a framework didn't end up slowing me down. I got to like focus on features. That's how I was so quick to be able to like get a lot of parity of the same features you find in other frameworks.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's the beauty of open source, right? Inspire, use, borrow, redo, improve, share, talk trash. Like, it's the principles.
Definitely.
So for the people that have been totally sold by this, they're ready to jump on the Solid train. Where will you send them? What should they do? Yeah,
go to the solidjs.com website. That a lot of work went into that. It's relatively new, honestly. That's what I was doing until I just did this 1.1 release. It feels like almost everything in 1.0 was there like in February, and I took 3 months writing a docs site. There's tutorials. The tutorial section there is great. There is docs, and you can look at the get started. But honestly, we looked at talking about copying. We looked at Svelte, and I was like, those tutorials are And that's what we did. There's 40 tutorials on there to get started in learning Solid.
Cool. I just dropped those in the chat. Yeah, I like it's got a very Svelte-like feel where you got like the REPL on the side and then the explanations on the left.
Yeah,
I like that style quite a bit.
They've definitely done a lot of really good stuff, and I pay attention to a lot of the frameworks. It started when I was benchmarking. I benchmark every framework and learn all the tricks of what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, I'm always looking at what different technology is. That's why I love open source.
Well, cool. Is there anything else we haven't covered? Anything else you want to plug or mention? It's been awesome. I've definitely learned a lot about how the framework works.
Yeah. I mean, why not? I mean, people probably heard it a ton by now, but Solid's been doing a lot of work with starters in terms of Vite and Astro. And you already mentioned Astro at the beginning. Those projects are amazing, and people should check them out too, because they kind of take your SPA framework and just expand what you can do with it so much. And they've saved me, again, another example of not having to do a bunch of work myself. I am working on a starter with Vite, but like so much, like if I want to make something like Next.js, there's so much that Vite takes care of for me in that situation. So those are really good. And then also a quick plug for my the other framework I work on Marko.js. If you're into multi-page apps, maybe you work in e-commerce, it is probably it's the way to go. So I know that's kind of dropping something off on the end there, but yeah, I think I've been taking a two-tiered approach of looking at like Solid as the ideal SPA and Marko as the idealized MPAs. So, check out those technologies.
Cool. I dropped in some links, and we have not had Vite on this program before. Maybe we have to get someone, Dan. But Astro, that's a good segue to my plug. Read just the React Wednesdays homepage, which I'm going to drop in the chat. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking Astro. So if you want a fun hangout session to learn that, feel free to stop by. Well, this has been cool. Dan, do you have anything else to plug before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'll mention the Enterprise React newsletter, because that's where I get all my up-to-date JavaScript news. They don't ever sell my email, so I appreciate that.
All right, I will drop. Got to get my copy and paste skills in. So all those links that all of us mentioned, they're in the chat. So whether you're on Twitch or YouTube, they're on one side or the other. So you can check those out. And thanks, Ryan, one last time. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Well, cool. Again, we do this every week. So until next week, see y'all.
Take care.